introduce myself. To start off with, I'm your moderator for this session. My name is Mirsky. I am a reporter with Jay, the Jewish News of Northern California. We have a table downstairs. Go and pick up a copy. We have a really fantastic panel, 3/4 of which are here, and the last quarter will turn up very, very soon. So we're here to talk about activism on the ground, needs, what can be done, what's being done. So we have a really stellar lineup here. Next to me is Yotam Polizer. He's the CEO of Israel, which is a incredibly well-known NGA aiding people on the ground. You must have heard of them a lot when we were talking about Ukraine. They know a lot about helping people through trauma. Next to him is Neta Katz. She's the chief program officer, head of the Jewish Agency, Delegation in North America for the Jewish Agency for Israel. She has a lot of fans here today. She won the popularity contest. And also with us right now, Daryl Messinger, who is a woman of many, many hats in the Jewish organizational world. Today she's here as chair of the Reform Movement Zionist arm, and also a member of the Israel Emergency Allocations Committee for Jewish Federations of North America. We also will have joining us on the panel Laura E. Adkins, who is the opinion editor of The Forward, a newspaper that is only 2 years younger than our newspaper, by the way. So we'll just say it's the second best Jewish newspaper in the country, the best being Jay, the Jewish News. Laura, there you are. You didn't get to hear me make my jokes about The Forward. No, we love The Forward. So we've been talking about, all through today about action and what can be done. So I wanted to start by talking about what are the needs? Like, what really are the needs of Israelis right now? Emotionally, financially, physically, what do they need? And Neta, you want to start with that?
Thank you. So before we started talking about the needs, I would like to share with you 4 figures. 27, 9,000, 48,000, and 500 million. 27, if we set Shiva, which is, as you know, the Jewish tradition for observing a week of mourning after a person's burial, for every Israeli killed on October 7th, we would sit for 27 years. 9,000. The Fund of Victims of Terror of the Jewish Agency was established 21 years ago. Since its establishment, the fund has allocated 9,000 grants. From just October 7th until now, we will be distributing 9,000 grants. 48,000. 48,000. 1,400 Israelis is the equivalent of more than 48,000 Americans killed in one day, population-wise. 500 million. Over $500 million were donated to Israel by American Jewry through the Federation system. It will not take us 27 years, but it will take us a long time to bury our dead, mourn, say our goodbyes, recover, and rebuild the state of Israel. More than 1,400 Israelis dead in one day means that everyone in Israel knows somebody that was either murdered, kidnapped, or injured. 9,000 grants being allocated to victims of terror, so far evidence of the scope of the tragedy we are all facing. Sadly, there will very likely be more grants allocated before this war is won. Over $500 million raised for Israel is the testimony of Israel Arivim Ze Bazeh, for the love and the support from the world to Israeli people. Based on these figures, these are the need. The need to assist victims of terror, emergency support for southern businesses, and rebuilding the kibbutzim, the yeshuvim, the small towns that were destroyed and burned. Regarding the emotional needs, knowing that they, the people of Israel, are not alone, is one of the most crucial these days.
Daryl, you wanted to update that number?
Just quickly, and we'll talk more about it in just a minute. But as of last Friday, over 600 million has been raised. And as you'll hear today, that will only start to meet the need. But let's not minimize that amount.
No,
It is extraordinary.
Yeah. Yotam, you want to talk a little bit about what people on the ground need right now?
Sure. So Israel, the organization that I have the privilege to lead, has been around for 22 years. We worked in 62 countries. And the vision that the founders thought about 22 years ago was to bring Israeli expertise to disaster areas around the world. So I personally led our work in Japan after the tsunami, in the Ebola, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in many other places. We never thought we will have to respond at home. But this is the largest humanitarian crisis since the establishment of Israel. And I'll add a few figures, and then I'll talk a little bit of what I saw and experienced when I was there in the evacuation centers last week. So we're talking about more than 200,000 people who are internally displaced. Just to give an example, in the city of Eilat, that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, visited, it's like a nice resort town. There's about 50,000 residents and 62,000 evacuees. So the city more than doubled itself with evacuees right now. The other area, which is became like a huge refugee camp, sorry for this language, but this is what it feels like, is the Dead Sea hotels, where we have more than 8,000 evacuees. In fact, almost every hotel, guest house, Airbnb, anything like that in the country is now housing evacuees from the south or from the north. We all heard the figures about the people who were murdered, the people who were kidnapped, the people who were injured, but this is really a generational trauma. And we know too well that PTSD could happen after 10 years, after 20 years. But what we also know from research and from our experience in Israel and in all over the world is that it's very important to provide support from now, from the first moment, to do what we call psychological first aid. And that's big part of the focus of Israel and a few other organizations who are focusing on that. And that's a real challenge because everyone is traumatized. Everyone in the country is traumatized. And it's hard for people who are psychologists or therapists or social workers to leave their clients, even if their clients were not on the front line. As you can imagine, they're traumatized because they know someone, or because their son or daughter is in the IDF, or for every different reason. So this is a huge challenge, and I think one thing we can say for certain, and we'll talk a little bit later maybe about the role of the government versus civil society versus philanthropy, but we know for sure that the mental health needs will be there now and will be there for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So this is something we can count on for certain. What Israel is trying to do, I will just say shortly, we're trying to address the needs of the people who were evacuated from the front line. So mainly these kibbutzim who suffered the worst massacre, kibbutz Be'eri, who lost more than 130 members, kibbutz Nir Oz, which is a kibbutz, a small kibbutz, where a quarter of the members were either murdered or kidnapped, and they're now in hotel in Eilat, kibbutz Kisufim. We're trying to address their needs in their hotels, and the main focus is providing emotional support and education. And education is not important because it's important for the kids to learn math right now. That's not the point. The point is to give some sense of stability in a very fragile world that they're all facing. So we're working in 12 of these evacuation centers, but the needs are, of course, way beyond our reach and way beyond any specific organization, so we really need all hands on deck. I will say that, yes, it's important to look at the needs now, but we also need to start thinking about the midterm and the long-term needs, because we know also for certain that most of these kibbutzim and communities who were disseminated will not be able to go back to their homes at least for 2 years, at least.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about what the needs are. What are American Jews doing right now to meet those needs? And Daryl, I'll address this question to you.
So I want to say a little bit about the JFNA campaign that all federations are participating in, including ours, the San Francisco Federation, but also are the many umbrella organizations. And I serve on the allocations committee as a representative of the reform movement because we have asked all our congregations, our members, to donate through the federation system. Why? Because at this point in time, the needs are so vast, and there's so many ways that they need to be addressed. And you have to have the expertise in Israel, the experience over many years to understand which organizations can deliver, and the ability to process the number of requests. And that really requires, and that's why we have central organizations. Now, believe me, I understand some skepticism. I have been so impressed with what I have seen in 3 weeks. It is not the usual it is not only the usual suspects that are receiving funds. The federation system, working here in San Francisco with the expat Israeli community, but also in every other community, including New York Federation, Chicago, the really large ones who have had long-standing staffs in Israel, to identify the organizations like IsraAid that can step in where they maybe haven't been before. The best example of that is the protest movement, as many of you heard in various settings, has turned its operation into probably the largest social service organization on this planet. Over 15,000 volunteers a day are delivering humanitarian aid. They have taken over the Expo Center in Tel Aviv, which I think was the center for the GA in April, and they've turned it into a distribution center.
They just had to move because they ran out of space in the Tel Aviv Expo
Right, but there's
Center.
also one in Jerusalem. It's not one place. And the JFNA Distribution Allocation Committee that I sit on with not a lot of people, Susie Sorkin from San Francisco is also on that committee. We have moved money to Brothers and Sisters in Arms, which is serving this function, to the Jerusalem Humanitarian Crisis Center, and others. And that's just one example, and I'll go over some others. But let me just, right now, the primary needs that we're looking at, and these will change, are basic needs, emergency medical services and healthcare, emergency operational needs, evacuation, housing, and respite care for families in the frontline communities. And as was said, I've heard as numbers as high as 300,000 folks are now displaced, but at least 200,000 are displaced. Funds for victims of terror, with Neta identified, local efforts and volunteers, special populations, and trauma and relief mental health needs. We'll talk more about these, but I want to just give you one example of the type of trauma and mental health needs that have to be addressed. We know that in times of crisis, in times where people are stressed, that folks that are already living in stressful situations often encounter more violence. So women, particularly families with special needs children, all require additional identification and help at these kinds of times. And those are usually small organizations that are able to meet those needs. They know those individuals and those families. Those are also being identified by JFNA, by the specific local federations where they've had ongoing relationships. So I just want to highlight a couple right now.
Yeah, thank you. We touched a little bit on what's going on in Israel with civil society organizing to an amazing degree that has everybody blown away, although we all wish that it didn't have to be so amazing. So Laura, you just got back from 3 weeks reporting there. Tell us a little bit about what you saw.
Yeah. So I am not an activist, I'm a journalist, and there was a lot to see in Israel, obviously. I was north, south, central, everywhere. And I just want to touch on a few of the issues that weren't yet brought up that I really saw and the ways that civil society is mobilizing. The first short-term one is food. Israel only imports about 15% of their food, and that means the other 85% is grown and raised locally. And the kibbutzim are really, really suffering right now for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, October 7th, the deaths. But number two, 20,000 Gazans a day had work permits before October 7, and a lot of those were working on the kibbutzim. And the Thai government also has evacuated any of their citizens that were remaining. So that means that the kibbutzim are short about 30,000 workers a day. And right now, it's not only picking season for several key crops, it's also planting season for several others. I was at Mishmar HaNegev, which is in the seat of one of the biggest kibbutzim, and they are really just scrambling. And there's not a food crisis yet, but it is really imminent. And Achim L'Neshek, Brothers in Arms, Achim V'Neshek, has just done an amazing job mobilizing, but it's really hard to find people that are willing to work in these sorts of jobs because it's manual labor and it's within close proximity to Gaza, which means less time to run from rockets. And when you're working in a field, you're not usually close to a bomb shelter. So right now, there's not an immediate food crisis. Experts are telling me within 4 to 5 months, if things don't change in terms of employment and volunteers, we're going to have a real problem there. The second thing is medium term. There is just such an abdication of the government's basic functioning right now. I have spoken to more families of people who have kidnapped children in Gaza than the Prime Minister has, and that's a problem. So we're seeing an incredible mobilization of civil society, but I think we're going to have to really grapple with the profound effect of watching basically a government collapse while the government is also waging war. That is going to be something that Israelis and American Jews are going to have to deal with very soon. And then long term, we touched on this a little bit, but trauma is a concept in Israel that is really, really just beginning to even be spoken about within the last 10 years or so. And a lot of veterans of earlier wars are still dealing with their own trauma, and this particular moment is very re-traumatizing for a lot of those people as well. So long term, we know that there are profound effects on a society when there's both acute and chronic trauma happening. And on a positive note, it has been unbelievable seeing, it's one thing to hear that hotels are housing people, it's another thing to go into a 5-star hotel in Tel Aviv and see it's entirely filled with internal refugees, which I did last week. And the reason there's discrepancy in the numbers is partially because there's an official evacuation zone and then there's a zone of fear. So the official evacuation zone is within 5 kilometers of Gaza, 3.1 miles. If you're 6 kilometers away from Gaza, you still only have, if you hear a siren, about 12 to 15 seconds to get into a shelter. And another important thing to keep in mind is that the Iron Dome is actually less effective at close range than it is from far away. So we all know the stat that Iron Dome is 90% effective. It's about 60% effective at close range. So you also have just massive fear from people who are living in those close zones. So there's a lot of need, but again, there's also just an incredible, not only the foreign investment, which is important, but there's not an Israeli right now who is not doing something to mobilize on this.
Thanks. You brought up the long-term needs, and Yotam, you did too. Do you think you could speak a little bit more to what you see coming in, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think it's really hard for anyone to imagine going back to their homes at this stage, obviously because of the security and safety. But even within these communities who were devastated, there are quite a few that were completely burned down to the ground. So they will need a midterm solution. Nobody wants to stay in a hotel. Yes, it's nice to be in a they all said it was nice in the first 2 days, and that, so people are looking for midterm solutions. There are already some models that works. For example, Kibbutz Kfar Aza that we all heard about that went through one of the worst massacres is housed by Kibbutz Shfaim, not far from Netanya. And it's actually a pretty good model. It's not easy, obviously, for the host community and for the community that was evacuated, but at least they're able to live in their lifestyle. So a lot of the other kibbutzim and moshavim are looking for similar solution for a host community, but of course there's housing issues, there's livelihood issues, there's education, there's a lot of these issues. A lot of them were farming communities, as you said, so some of these people are actually going with these volunteers from Brother Inams and others to milk the cows and to pick up the tomatoes, so they don't want to be too far. Of course, also, I was part of the conversation in Kibbutz Be'eri, actually, they were talking about moving next to Jerusalem, but then they said, well, there's still sirens there. So they don't want to be anywhere, even though Jerusalem is now considered relatively safer than other areas, they don't want to be anywhere because everything triggers. So really, looking for these midterm solutions is going to be a huge challenge and will require a lot of resources. Definitely financial resources, but also in terms of infrastructure and a lot of community mobilization. People do talk about going back to their homes. Most people, not everyone, want to be able to go back to their homes, but again, that will require, first of all, a whole new reality for them from a safety and security perspective, and God only knows how that's going to look like, but also it will require billions of dollars of investment, and of course, that is a role that the government should play and take a leading role at. I can tell you that one of our frustrations, but also stuff that we are very proud of, is that right now we're operating these schools. So Israel, which again, we never imagined we'll have to do it in Israel, we're actually paying salaries of teachers and school principals, and we're renting spaces and setting up tents for these schools. Now, it doesn't mean that the government will not come in, they will, but without even getting too much into the political aspect of it, it just takes too long. So filling these gaps, these humanitarian gaps right now, understanding there will be long-term gaps, understanding that we don't understand what the government will do, but we know there will be gaps, is what we and other relief organizations have to look at. Now, I think one of my concerns, and that has been inspiring to see Brother Inams and other volunteer movements, is that we know that volunteering for long-term is also not sustainable. So I think one of the civil society biggest challenges is to see how we turn this incredible mobilization, which has been huge inspiration and really probably the most uplifting point since the massacre, to see how we turn it into organization with clear structure, strategy, work plan, and people who actually get paid, because people need to get paid to do this job. One of the things, we had a lot of people who wanted to volunteer as mental health professionals. We actually told them, we don't want you to volunteer. We want you to get paid so you can actually commit and take this worry off your back, and you can commit to these communities, because we know that mental health needs continuous treatment and support.
We talked a little bit earlier about that same thing, Daryl, in terms of funding and fundraising, that at the beginning it's a lot easier to raise money, but we need to be thinking about the long term.
Thanks. As I said, $600 million sounds like an enormous amount of money, and it is. And as was just said, it's going to require much, much more, and it's going to require creativity. So one of the things the JFNA Allocations Committee did was, we know there's needs to be like seed money for rebuilding, but we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So we made an initial block grant. So we set aside some funds. There's discussion about how do we mount a small business loan fund so that folks can restart their businesses and have some cushion until they can get to a level of profitability and cash flow that lets them sustain that. That's going to require another type of campaign and effort. But I also want to really stress in this room that it's going to require something from all of us. There isn't anything, it's going to require a commitment of resources that each of us needs to make that can't just be sustained by the largest foundations. Every gift matters in this situation. And we're seeing real generosity. I was talking to Joyce Asiski, who's out here in the back, who runs the San Francisco Federation. And we've already received donations from over, Joy, correct me, 2,000 folks. And half of those are new donors. And I really want to just encourage everyone to think about how they can contribute and, not be so put off by how much has been raised already to think that your contribution won't be appreciated or needed.
If I can stay on this just for a second, I think as you are doing that, discernment is super important. And I want to give just a couple of examples that I think illustrate this. Number one, the organizations that you're already involved with, I think it's really important to look for accountability and measurement for what is being invested in, because again, this is a long-term challenge. And something that I have noticed security officials in particular are really frustrated with is civilians trying to provide military aid is a recipe for disaster. And to illustrate this point, a couple of weeks ago, 100,000 ceramic vests arrived in Israel, defective. That's a big problem. If someone's wearing a bulletproof vest that they think is going to protect them and it's defective, that's a real issue. And there's been such an amazing outpouring of inertia and momentum around fundraising, and that is really important. But I think it's also important to really temper that with some discernment, and that includes official programs. Talk about big sums of money. The electronic fence on the border with Gaza underground was over, I believe, 2 billion shekel investment, and the sensors were taken down that day, and October 7th happened. So it requires discernment not just of where your money is going, but also really careful collaboration with partners on the ground, and sometimes it still won't work out, but I think momentum and discernment need to go hand in hand.
Zooming in again from this look at long term, Neta, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Fund for Survivors of Terror, which is sometimes coming in the shortest term possible, and then obviously staying with a person for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'll share a story of someone who just received a fund. So as I said, the Jewish Agency Fund for the Victims of Terror was established 21 years ago. And unfortunately, throughout the years, we've gained an enormous amount of experience, knowledge, effective tools and systems to assist us with those who were affected by terror. Within 40 hours of an attack, a representative of the Jewish Agency representing World Jury visits the victim and provides an immediate emergency grant of approximately 4,000 shekels. Years from now, many recipients of the assistance will not remember the exact amount of money they received, but they will remember two things. First, how that support made one of the darkest days of their lives a little brighter. And second, the words of the Jewish Agency worker or volunteer told them at the moment, which is something along the lines of, this is not just from the Jewish Agency from Israel. This is from Jews in New York, in Sao Paulo, in Johannesburg, in Sydney, who are standing with you right now. We are one people, and we mourn with you together, and we will make it through it. In this way, the Fund of Victims of Terror demonstrates that while the Israel we knew is gone, all of the Jewish people are more responsible than ever for helping make their brothers and sisters Israel whole. We have identified in this current unparalleled situation with the damage beyond anything imaginable. There are people in so financial stress that the initial 4,000 shekels grant is not sufficient. To this end, we have established a special fund that will give an extra 10,000 shekels to the most impacted and vulnerable victims, including orphans, parents unable to work, families who are known to the welfare system, and those who completely lost their homes, and elderly people without any family. So I will share with you a story, this was given to Tamar. On October 7th, Tamar was at the music festival together with her boyfriend, Ofek, of 3 years. Around 6:30 a.m., sirens started to blare at the music festival. Tamar and Ofek quickly got in their car to drive somewhere safe. Unfortunately, close to the music festival, there was a police roadblock, and they were unable to go any further. So the couple found an outdoor shelter and quickly ran inside. Very soon, terrorists started to attack the shelter, shooting at them with automatic weapons and throwing grenades. Fortunately, Tamar and Ofek were able to escape and started searching for a safer place. But everywhere they looked, they saw people who were wounded, killed, and others screaming in panic. Tamar and Ofek eventually reached Kibbutz Alumim, where they managed to enter an apartment. Ofek helped Tamar hide under a bed while he grabbed a kitchen knife. Soon, they heard terrorists inside the house, and they heard gunfire all around them. Ofek was shot in his chest, and he was killed. Tamar screamed, and as she tried to escape, she was shot in her stomach. One terrorist yelled at her, asking, "What is your name?" Barely breathing, she replied and pleaded for him not to kill her. He took aim with his gun, but suddenly fled as Israeli soldiers approached the house. Tamar collapsed to the floor and made a tourniquet around her stomach. She lay there for hours, beside her beloved Ofek, until she was safely evacuated. Tamar suffers from wounds to her back and a bullet wound to her stomach, which has caused severe nerve damage. Currently, she's unable to stand or walk and will require long-term rehabilitation. She's thankful for the Fund for Victims of Terror for providing her with an immediate financial grant, which will help her with her basic financial needs at this time.
So there's these very serious financial needs for all sorts of people who've been affected, whether they've left because they are worried, they're not in the evacuation zone, but they're worried, understandably, down to people who are suffering grievous wounds. So the monetary need is there. What about other needs that people here in this room, in this country, can provide in terms of political activism, emotional solidarity, support, spreading the message?
So if
Go ahead.
Okay, so if I can please recognize, there's a Jewish agency Shlichim in the room. Please raise your hand. Yeah. And these amazing emissaries are part of a delegation of 363 shlichot and shlichim in North America, bringing their own stories into the communities, bringing the stories of their families, of their friends. And one of the things that we encourage and we ask the Jewish community, as they did as so far, is to hear their stories and share their stories with their friends and with their families and with Jews or non-Jews, but bring the stories that our shlichim are bringing into the community and helping them and helping us spread them around. I would say that the solidarity rallies and the advocates and the social media and all these efforts are amazing and very powerful in assisting us to do our job. And for the Israelis, the shlichim that are now far away from home, where your hearts are with your families and your friends, but they stand here bravely, with you, beside you, And we had an earlier conversation. This is an opportunity to strengthen the bond between the young generation. That if we, looked at all the Pew Research, 2013, 2019, drifting apart, I think this is a time that we can reconnect, find the common language, create those bridges between people to people. So this is something that we, as the Jewish Agency, as agent of the Jewish people, with our wonderful, amazing, brave, talented, professional shlichot and shlichim, need from the world jury. Thank you.
Daryl, yeah, go ahead.
So obviously there is donating and being part of understanding where those funds are going and to provide encouragement to others and oversight and discernment. I'm happy I'll post someplace, I'm not sure, on the Z3 site, where you can see where all the organizations that are being funded collectively. But I want to point a couple of other things you can do personally. We all have seen the horrible social media posts, and many of us, myself included, what do we do? What do we say? What's the right way to react? How do we not just perpetuate, right? Because sometimes by responding, you're only giving them more followership. So on the arza.org site, the ARTSA site, that's the Association for Reformed Zionists of America, there's some documentation as to how to respond, when to respond on social media. We all have to be vigilant here, and how do we make sure that we're not just adding to the noise and the falsehoods that are out there. Third, our Israeli friends and family need to hear from us. And I can't, I don't know if this is an American or it's just me, but sometimes I'm like, well, they're probably hearing from everyone. I don't want them to feel like they have to respond. They so appreciate it. Just checking in, hope you're doing as well as you can do. Just the acknowledgement that we understand that things are not good. I can't stress it enough. So many of us have friends. Please reach out to them. And not just once. I've been trying to do some of my list every Shabbat. Just sending them a quick email or a text or WhatsApp. Finally, our kids really need our support. And by kids, I mean our teens, our college kids, and our young adults. They're confused, they're struggling, and they really need to hear that what we think and how it is that they can help. And remind them about their birthright trip or their Nifty in Israel trip or their other association with Israelis so that they reconnect and have that connection. I know I said finally, and as Shai Held said, rabbis get 3. I don't know what lay people get.
You get as many as you want, Daryl. It's okay.
But here's one other thing. We need our friends who are not Jewish to please be our allies. And that they're stuck too. They don't know what and how to respond. So reach out to your good friends and say, I need you to be on social media and resharing my posts. Please make sure you say Hamas is a terrorist organization, that what they did was unconscionable. We need to ask. We're not used to asking. Ask our friends for help. They're not all thinking otherwise, but they really don't know what's okay to say.
So actually, I want to pick up on exactly what Daryl was mentioning, because I think it's a very important point, and Israelis were very deep in our struggle right now. But I can tell you personally that 90% of my time I dedicate now to the actual emergency response. But 10% of my time I'm on these different briefings with, and Israel is considered a global humanitarian organization, and we are part of many networks with the UN and Doctors Without Borders and the Red Cross and others. And I found myself on calls almost every other day where Israel is the only organization responding in Israel, with 10 other organizations responding in Gaza. And it's not an easy space to be in, to say the least. But I think it's very important. And I think it's not just about hasbara or that kind of thing. It's really about showing and sharing with the world what the real situation is, what are the humanitarian needs in Israel now, because we're all seeing what the media is. And also to share, and I have been asked many times, they said, okay, why don't you respond in Gaza? And my answer to that is, you know what? Actually, there are traumatized children in Gaza. There are need for access to clean water, which is one of our expertise that we're doing around the world. There's a need for trauma care. And if I had a way to send my team there and make sure they come out in one piece, and not only that my team will come out in one piece, that whoever work with us from the Palestinian side will be safe, I would have done it yesterday. So I really do think that the non-Jewish space, the human rights, the academics, the humanitarian, is a very important space for us to be in. It's a very important space for us to share our stories, to bring the stories of the hostages, for example. So we have to step out of our immediate circles. I'm going, I wouldn't do it, but I'm going all over the States with this shirt, Israel, and people tell me, are you okay? Are you feel sad? For me, it's like the most natural thing. We're going in Morocco, or when we evacuated people from Afghanistan, we go with this T-shirt. So I won't be able to go in San Francisco with a T-shirt called Israel. It's surreal. So, of course, I'm not advocating for risking yourself or asking for troubles, but I really do think this is now more important than ever to show that there are real needs on the Israeli side, and that we still want to build bridges, even in such a broken world.
Yeah. I think I'll narrow it down to 4 suggestions that were not touched upon here. Something really important when you are reaching out to your Israeli friends. I was with several of these past few weeks, and one of them said, I sometimes get the feeling that they're reaching out to see how I'm doing more for themselves than for me. And I think it's really important to, A, really check your intentionality when you're reaching out, and B, phrase it in a way that doesn't require something of them. So I think exactly how Daryl phrased it, hope you're doing as well as can be, no need to respond to this, something like that, versus, are you okay? What can I do? Da-da-da-da. That's not helpful.
Or even what happened,
Right.
which is asking somebody to kind of relive perhaps a trauma.
Right. Second suggestion, related to the insane social and regular media environment right now, one of the best ways that we combat disinformation is by funding better information. And this is not a shameless plug for the Forward. It is, but also all of the local journalism in Israel, all of the local journalism in your own Jewish communities, all of them are struggling financially, and the way that you actually get the story of what is happening in the hospital that is bombed is by having reporters that are familiar with the local environment, speak the languages, and are actually reporting, doing that work to tell what is going on.
I'm happy to put in a shameless plug for Jewish journalism right now.
Yes, it's important. It's also important to remember that investing in your own Jewish community, wherever that is as important as investing in the ones in Israel, because community is what is going to get us through whatever the next chapter of this is. And I don't need to tell you that there's a massive disengagement problem with Jewish institutions in general. So the extent to which you can lean in to the ones in your area, that will be really helpful. And once you lean in, as Rabbi Shai Held, I think, said so beautifully today, it is our responsibility to call out the extremism within our own communities, whatever those communities are. And if there is anyone else in this room who also, as me, has deep ties to the Orthodox world, something that I heard from a lot of the farmers and the kibbutzim was, we need 20,000, 30,000 workers. There's a lot of yeshivot nearby who their young men are not doing military service. This is not actually a pie-in-the-sky idea. They were working on talking to some of the local yeshivas to see if there could be some volunteer efforts. So if you also have ties to that world, that might be a good place to push, not only on the extremism front, but on the how can we volunteer in a way that fits with the ethics of our community. So basically lean into the spaces that you already are is a really good first step.
Yotam, we talked a little bit earlier about finding in this chaos and tragedy a little bit of direction for moving forward in terms of making those connections between Jews here, Jews everywhere. And I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, all my life has been about, chasing disasters and dealing with the world's biggest tragedies, again, from the tsunami in Japan, the Ebola, the Syrian refugees, the Afghan crisis, Ukraine, of course, most recently in Morocco. Just 2 months ago, our team went to Morocco after the earthquake. Now it feels like 10 years ago. But for me, it was always about finding what I call an opportunity for post-traumatic growth. So we all know about post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma, but post-traumatic growth is sort of the flip side, is how after a disaster we can have an opportunity to bounce forward. And that doesn't mean that we should hope for disasters, definitely not our biggest disaster that we just experienced on October 7th, but there are opportunities, and I think we can already identify some of these opportunities that are coming out of this terrible tragedy. In the panel before us, people spoke about the civil society, and we spoke about it here too, how the civil society in Israel, and we put away our differences, and God knows we have a lot of them. And the example of how the protest movement turned into the biggest humanitarian organization in Israel is just one beautiful example for that. The second opportunity that we have is really about connecting, and I think that's a lot what Z-Free is all about, is how we can use this terrible tragedy as an opportunity to reconnect the Jewish community and Israel, especially the younger generation. And I think there are a lot of practical opportunities to engage between the community here and communities from these kibbutzim who went through really the worst atrocities a person could think of. But I think really they would love the solidarity. They would love to get these messages that Laura talked about now, but they would also love to come and visit here and learn from how community is thriving here. And I think there's so many exchanges that could be created. And then the last circle, which is also, I think, an opportunity, even though it feels very far away from now, there are unique opportunities to connect and build bridges between Jews and non-Jews now. And in the panel before, there was a beautiful organization called Adjunct that's doing amazing work on shared society between Bedouins and Jews in the Negev, and we have been partnering with them now in this crisis. But I can share with you that for me, probably the most uplifting moment in the last 4 weeks was a message that I got from an Afghan ambassador that I want to read to you. It'll take me just 30 seconds. So this Afghan ambassador, his name is Ambassador Jawad, he was the Afghan ambassador in Washington. And when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, we partnered with him to rescue 205 girls from the hands of the Taliban in an operation that will put Fauda to shame. At the peak of this operation, I was on the Afghan border with a team of people, and we needed passports for some of these girls who didn't have passports. So this ambassador printed these passports, sent it to us to the border of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. We smuggled them across the border, and these girls were able to go out. But that's a story for a different time. But on October 8th, literally less than 24 hours after we found out about the massacre, he wrote me this beautiful note. He said, "Yotam, my friend, I'm writing with a very heavy heart to express my deepest condolences and profound sympathy for the recent barbaric terrorist attack in Israel. I hope your family, friends, and loved ones are safe. The news of the terrorists is devastating, and my thoughts have been with you and my friends in Israel during this difficult time. I personally feel the pain and grief as my own people have experienced the horrors of terrorism and barbarism for decades. I understand all too well the profound impact such acts of violence can have on individuals, families, and communities. The strength and resilience of the Jewish community show the power of human spirit in the face of savagery and callousness. Please know that we are here for you as a friend and as someone who profoundly feels your pain. May the memories of the innocent victims be a blessing, and may their families find solace in the support of friends during these very difficult times. My thoughts and prayers are with you, with families of the victims and all those affected by this terrible tragedy, with heartfelt sympathy and solidarity. Ambassador Jawad, an Afghan Muslim leader.
If I could just add, not regarding Afghanistan, but regarding the second circle that you mentioned, the partnerships. The Jewish Agency, throughout the infrastructure of Partnership Together, is now identifying the needs of the communities in Israel and communities here who would like to partner. It's not about adopting, it's about partnering together. So we are working on identifying and crystallizing the needs and creating the best fits for a continuum partnership together between the communities in Israel that were destroyed and the communities here in the States.
Just because we're actually running out of time already, I want to leave some room for questions, but I wanted to ask the whole panel, if somebody comes to you right now and says, what should I do, what can I do? What would be the thing that you would say back to them?
3 things. Bring them home. Keep the names and the lives of these hostages front and center. Second, go to the JCRC pages and see where you need to show up, whether it's a town hall, a school board, a meeting at a congregation, or elsewhere. We're facing unprecedented pressure, anti-Semitic pressure here in the Bay Area. We need to show up. And finally, write your representatives, write the administration, thank them. Thank them. They are hearing from all sorts of folks about why they are doing the wrong thing. They have to hear from us how important the actions, particularly of this administration's, are. Without them, Israel would be in a very different place today. So please, don't let your political voice, your advocacy voice, be silent right now. Be loud and be clear. Thank them.
So I couldn't agree more with everything that Daryl said. And I will just say one more thing that in addition, and it's been told here, and I think donating to JFNA, the Jewish Federation, grassroots organization, initiatives, organization like Israel is all very, very important. I think it's very important to understand 2 things about philanthropy. One, we need everyone in the long run. The needs will be there not only now, but in the next generation. But I will say the next 2-3 years will be crucial until hopefully people will be able to go back to their homes. The Jewish Agency, of course. But also, I think we can, all of us, as philanthropists, as people who care, can look for specific needs. I can tell you that I'm trying to always find where are the gaps. So just today, we decided to adopt another project of a beautiful project that started by an Israeli entrepreneur who have a beautiful resort in Cyprus. It's called the Healing Forest, and he decided to dedicate his resort to healing of the people from the music festival. So he's taking 60 survivors every week for a healing retreat, and he did it from his own money, and he somehow found us, and he said, I need your help. I need someone to take over this project because there's about 1,400 of these survivors who expressed the need to come to this healing retreat and then continuing ongoing psychological treatment after. So that's for me, was an opportunity to say, okay, that's a community that I haven't done anything yet about, and we're now going to partner with him and continue this project. So just an example of how we can find specific humanitarian gaps and support them.
Do you want to add something, Laura, Neta?
Yeah, do you want to go?
You can go first.
Okay, I want to go last.
Okay, I'll let you go last.
Because I went first. So
There was a study I read when I was probably in middle school that I have still not stopped thinking about, which found a slight correlation between people who recycle and people who cheat on their taxes. And I think it's very important to not let yourself off the hook for staying engaged on this by doing one or two things. And it's also important to remember that we are in incredibly early days of this war, unfortunately. And if you don't set up infrastructure in your own life to sanely stay engaged, to do so in a sustained way, you're going to burn out, and it's not going to be good for you or your families or your communities. And third, if you're thinking about physically going, I think it's really important to think about, I studied econ, so forgive the term, what is your comparative advantage? What are your skills and expertises, and how do they align with what is actually needed on the ground? And the answer might end up being that even though it feels better to go, and trust me, I get that impulse, I hopped on the first plane that I could, sometimes it might actually be more beneficial to the Jewish community globally for you to actually stay where you are and invest in what is immediately around you.
So I started with numbers, with figures, and I want to end with a short poem that a friend of mine, Elinor Biton Bariach from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, sent me a few days when I asked her again on the 11th of October, how can I help? During the 7th of October, we text. I live in New Jersey, and she lives in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and she wrote me a farewell note. We're friends for 20 years. She said that we won't survive this time. And I said, Elinor, you're in the mamad, you're in the shelter, you're safe. And we corresponded. Thank God, after 20 hours, they were rescued, while apparently the Hamas terrorists were on their gag on the roof, shooting people who were running away from the burned houses surrounding them. So she felt that it's over for them. We're friends for more than 20 years, and she sent me a short poem. I'll read it first in Hebrew, and then I'll try to translate it well enough. אימא לאימא, לפעמים כל מה שאימא אחת צריכה זו אימא אחרת, שתחזיק לה את הכאב רק לרגע אחד, שתראה לה את הלב רק לרגע אחד, שתחבק אותה חזק רק לרגע אחד, שתזכיר לה גם אם לרגע שהיא לא לבד. Mother to mother. Sometimes what a mother needs is a mother that will hold her pain just for one moment, a mother that will see her heart just for one moment, a mother that will hold her tight just for one moment, that will remind her for one moment that she's not alone. And I think this is what we should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Neta. We have some time for questions from the audience. We have a mic that will be going around. Let's
Just
start
raise
right
your
here.
hand. You spoke about what you can do for political advocacy, and I can tell you that the U.S.-Israel relationship is strong because of the work that we do with AIPAC. And so I make a shameless plug to help us. The Congress is supporting Israel right now primarily because of the work that we do day in and day out. And this is not partisan, not political, and Israel doesn't take partisan positions here or in Israel, but we support that relationship. And our work is, this is what AIPAC was made for, because they're going to be coming after us, after Israel, for all the ugliness that's going to happen in the next few months. And we are those who push back. So my appeal is to all of you to help us.
Thank you. I think we had a question over here. I'm going to make you go as far as you can with that microphone. I'm so sorry.
Just another thought about something that can be done. So I'm from Israel. I've been here 2 weeks. Since October 8th, we've been holding workshops for, especially for the Jewish population who, oh my God, I'm shaking, were very traumatized. And for the therapists, for the past 30 years, I've been working for peace with Israelis and Palestinians. And since I've come to the United States, just for 2.5 weeks, I'm going back in 5 days, I've just seen the amount of pain and trauma here. And I would really like to ask, invite, recommend, I don't know what, for there to be healing circles right here for the Jews together to share. Because it's very, a lot's coming up, a lot of grief, a lot of fear. And we believe that pain that is not transformed is transmitted. And that's what the kind of work we're doing in Israel is to create spaces for the pain to be transformed, so people don't act it out in the world. So please, just inviting you to do that here. And my friend Chagit here is just a wonderful therapist, facilitator, healer. Can talk to her too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have here in the back and then 2 rows forward.
Hi, thank you very much. Is that on? It's on. First, just a quick statement. The Israeli Department of Foreign Ministry has a digital specialist, and I went to a website or a webinar for this, and I encourage that we get more information because they have the do's and don'ts kind of ideas that add to what was said earlier about the challenges of social networking. My question actually relates to how do we help the families of the reservists, 300,000 of them who are now away from their families, away from their incomes, and there's mental issues, of course, but there's financial issues. So what part of the philanthropy that you all have described in very positive ways will get to help the families of the reservists?
I can point you to several different places. One is a effort within the Jewish agency called Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is supporting lone soldiers and other families of reservists and folks in the Army. But there are any number of efforts right now that are not just for the evacuees, but also food cards and other types of help with wages that are not coming in because folks are serving, right, and are not making the same type of income or their businesses can't function. So there are any number of organizations along those lines, many of which have already received initial grants.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I think you were next.
Yeah, my question is actually more about right here. Every time I listen to the radio, every time I, watch the news, I'm just furious. What can we do here to make an impact? I don't know if it's within the realm of your discussion. For example, donating to NPR. NPR has been always a wonderful station to listen to here. It's a national public radio. They have good programs. And since the war, their programs are mostly focusing on Gaza and the Palestinians, and there's very little balance. Is withdrawing support enough, or sending letters? You don't know where they fall on deaf ears.
Well, I will say, as a journalist, and I'm sure Laura can back me up on this, that when you write to a journalist or to an organization, a newspaper, or a radio station, those letters are read and they are listened to. So I do encourage you to reach out to maybe if you have something specifically that you heard that you say, I just want to point out I have another feeling on this. So even if you don't get a response, and I hope you do get a response, they are read and they are listened to. So that's one thing.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, I last week was on Fox and NPR on the same day, which was the funniest experience of my entire life. But I think that investing, again, in really engaged journalists who know the area well is really important right now. My good friend Amir Tibon, who writes for Haaretz, spent 10 hours on October 7th hiding in his mamad with his 2 young kids, and his father ended up rescuing him, not even the army. And he has been an incredible voice in both Hebrew and English. He was on 60 Minutes. So I think finding the good journalists who are talking about the truth of what's happening right now and amplifying them to the extent that you can, he's great. All of the Haaretz team has been incredible. I think local American Jewish journalists as well. So definitely write in, especially if you've been a subscriber for a long time. I know that when I see an email at the top of my inbox that says, I've been reading the foreword for 20 years and I hate your article, you know, that does, it does something. So write into the publications you're engaged with and also amplify the journalists who are speaking in a nuanced way, I would say.
Thank you. I think we had one over here, 2 over here, and 1 over there.
It's so flattering that other Jews let you speak first. I only have a question because I have no answers. So tagging on to that last question, the journalists and other people on stage, what are stories you've heard or things you've witnessed that have not made the cutting room floor? That perhaps you couldn't do it because it was limited word space or other editors got in the way, but you haven't had a chance to share. Like, so stories you've heard, things that you've witnessed, etc. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to give that to Laura, and that could be a whole other hour, I'm sure.
Yes, it definitely
give us the 2-minute version.
Yes, I did write about this briefly, but I broke the story of how, again, Brothers in Arms, in addition to doing everything civil aid-wise in the Tel Aviv Expo Center, they also are literally running an operation to find the hostages using the best Israeli tech minds who have flown back in from here, probably, and archaeologists who are mapping the terrain, and just like incredible brilliance, 3,000 Israelis who are brilliant tech geniuses spending their time engaged on this. But the reason that the protest movement has been so successful at this is a really interesting story, and a big part of it is that they are using exactly the tech infrastructure that they use to mobilize people very quickly for the after Shabbat protest. They're using that exact same mobilization infrastructure to get volunteers for this effort. And I think there's a lot that our communities can learn about just the nuts and bolts of community organizing. And they are also mobilizing on bringing back the chatufim, the hostages, in a really big way. And again, using that same technology and infrastructure. So I would be really interested in reading or writing more about just the ways in which civil society has been able to be most effective on these things. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Moran Solboza. Amongst other things, I'm also David Brose's daughter, for those who knows what that means. I currently live in Tel Aviv, and I can't go back. I think your comment just now set me up for what I was coming to say. I am a sister in arms. I have been on the streets of Tel Aviv since January 7th. I came here to ask for help because I grew up in New Jersey. It turns out that even yesterday and 3 days ago and a week ago, I had very intelligent, intellectual, prominent Jewish friends here who had no idea that there were even protests going on. Mind you, part of what we were trying to say was flagging people to say, hey, something like what happened on October 7th might happen if you continue this way. We might want to just stop for a second and do internal family kind of conversation before the whole world realizes our security isn't that great. And I wanted to say, usually there's government, civil society, and the army protecting civil society. That's 3. Currently there are 4. That 4th one is the people of Israel who, from their pockets, we have hardly worked, we have hardly slept, we have been screaming at the top of our lungs. I walk around with a whistle on my neck still, in fear or in preparation for any moment that I could just say, help. And that's what I came here for. And then October 7th happened. And I called my friends and I said, do I stay or do I come back home? And they said, if you can do more there, stay there for us. And this morning, right before the kidnapped families spoke at the opening ceremony, I got a phone call from the ground, and they said, help. And I said, I'm here in what's Silicon Valley. I work with high-tech protests, blah, blah, blah. I was like, apparently they have offices here, and there are people who really want to help. They want to know how. So I'm offering myself. I'm here. I can't go back right now. I'm here. I'm in LA. I'm in New York, New Jersey. I'll go anywhere if it helps us to be able to have a safe haven for the Jewish peoples, not just the Jewish religion, the Jewish peoples of the world have a place to go 3, 6 months from now, generations to come. And I believe that together we will be able to have that and bring back security. So I'm in touch with many organizations here and there. We're bringing together influential voices, media, money, and streaming it straight to the people who need it. I love what I'm seeing here, that people are doing more and more. I want to thank you for that, and I'm going to tell them back home. Thank you, and let me know how I can help everyone.
I forgot to mention that Brothers in Arms just got tax-exempt status like a few days ago within Israel, so that is an option.
Any other questions from the audience? Got one more.
I'm going back to the comments about journalism, and it seems to me that in recent years, journalists have become more and more focused on advocacy rather than on the old standard of objectivity, separating the editorial from the news. And you look at what's going on in NPR or the New York Times or several other publications, you see the focus on Gaza partly because it's news, but partly because it's all the news that fits our frame. And that's the way it appears to me. They have a paradigm. If it doesn't fit, they tend to exclude it, or they reframe it. The journalists here, what do you think of that observation? Is that correct?
It's definitely a factor. I think a bigger factor, and I noticed this when I was at Kibbutz Be'eri about 2 weeks after the disaster. I went on a press trip that the IDF coordinated, and it was like 70 of us on a bus in our helmets and vests, feeling very official. And we walk around the kibbutz, which was a very weird experience that I wrote several pieces about. You can read on the forward. But I watched a lot of these people who have never been to Israel before, don't speak any of the languages, just kind of come, take their pictures of our pain, and then they go home in 2-3 days. And journalism in general, you can attest to this, we have to go very fast to keep up with the frenetic pace that readers expect in a digital news environment. And often that means that a lot of these international newsrooms that are covering these conflicts, in the same way that if I had to cover Taiwan, I would just go to the official press conferences, I would take my pictures, I'm not going to push too hard. And in this conflict, there are really no international journalists in Gaza who are not there already, but I think it's also just a symptom of people going really quickly. You saw that with the hospital story, where we all received an embarrassing series of push alerts from the New York Times. I'll leave it at that, but I think objectivity is a huge thing that needs to be dealt with, but also it's just the speed you have to go in an under-resourced newsroom to cover everything. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but that's why investing in people that actually work there or know the area very well, investing in that type of journalism is especially important during war.
I want to say that we've run out of time. My timer went up. So I really want to say thank you to this panel. Everybody on this panel was fantastic. I want to say a special thank you to the two Israeli members of this panel and also all the Israelis who've come to this conference and who've spoken, who've done a sort of double duty of having to talk about all of this with us. So a special thank you to them, plus the work that they do. And thank you to the audience for coming and for asking questions.